how does glucose travel from the liver to skeletal muscle? From the liver, glucose is transported via the hepatic vein to the inferior vena cava, right atrium, right ventricle, pulmonary artery, lungs, pulmonary vein, left atrium, left ventricle, aorta, and finally, into the peripheral circulation. In the presence of insulin, skeletal muscle expresses GLUT4, the transporter required to uptake glucose from the blood. Glucose metabolism entails glycolysis, pyruvate decarboxylation, the tricarboxylic acid cycle, and the electron transport chain.
Oh, boy! Look at that big old pot of ATP!
Hold on there, Jackson. It's not so simple. Glucose must be metabolized through many steps before we can reach the big ATP payoff.
Alright, well, let's get started then.
Glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm, whereas pyruvate decarboxylation, the TCA and ETC, occur in the mitochondrion. Glycolysis in the cytoplasm, everything else in the mitochondrion. Welcome to your ATP scoreboard. The complete metabolism of one molecule of glucose yields a total pot of 32 ATP. Note the blue line dividing the scoreboard in two. Without oxygen, we net a measly 2 ATP. With oxygen, we capture all of those flags, and the electron transport chain will make it rain ATP. Glucose has 6 carbons. We will keep track of each one. Jackson, the MCAT is to medical school admission as ATP investment is to ATP payoff. Payoff requires prior investment. In the first and third reactions of glycolysis, we invest a total of 2 ATP. This is the investment phase. Note the frown faces marking ATP investment. But don't worry, Jackson, payoff is to come. Then, fructose 1,6-bisphosphate encounters a pair of scissors known as fructose bisphosphate aldolase, which cleaves this 6-carbon molecule into 2 twin 3-carbon molecules. 3 plus 3 equals 6. We haven't lost any carbons. Think of the scissors as the dividing line between the investment phase and the payoff phase. Let's continue with glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Remember, 3 plus 3 equals 6. All of the following reactions will happen twice. A yellow flag here represents the reduction of NAD+ to NADH. Recall the oil rig mnemonic. Reduction is gain. NAD+ is reduced to NADH. That is, NAD+ gains an electron. Let's set this NADH aside until we get to the ETC. And then, a happy face. We make our first ATP back. The last step of glycolysis and an irreversible reaction, pyruvate kinase converts phosphoenol pyruvate to pyruvate, producing another ATP. Remember, we produce 2 glyceraldehyde 3-phosphates, thus producing a total of 2 NADH and 4 ATP. Y ya terminamos. We have completed the glycolysis, converting 1 molecule of glucose into 2 molecules of pyruvate. Now, the fate of pyruvate will be decided. Is oxygen present? Yes or no? Without oxygen, pyruvate will be metabolized to lactate by lactate dehydrogenase. Dehydrogenase. This enzyme removes a hydrogen from NADH to form NAD+. The upside-down flag marks this oxidation. The oxidation of NADH to NAD+ regenerates cofactor required for anaerobic glycolysis to continue cycling. Without oxygen, our investment yields minimal payoff. 2 ATP invested and only 4 ATP gained, a measly net of 2 ATP. Anaerobic metabolism is considerably less efficient than aerobic metabolism.
Halt! Holy 4-leaf clovers, it's a leprechaun! The name's Gaspy. Where do you think you 2 lads are headed? Look, Mr. Leprechaun, we're simply following the rainbow to reach the pot of ATP. Ha! No passage for you 2 lads without oxygen.
Gaspy's right. Oxygen is the final electron acceptor at the end of the ETC. No oxygen, no ATP.
Bring me some oxygen, and I'll make it rain ATP.
Off we go, Jackson. Only 21% of the air we breathe is oxygen. From Miami Beach to Mount Kilimanjaro, this 21% remains constant. As altitude increases, atmospheric pressure decreases, thus decreasing the partial pressure of oxygen.
Wow! Blueberries, grapes, and cherries!
That's right, Jackson. Red blood cells become progressively more oxygenated as they move through the alveolar capillary interface.
Oh, I see. So RBCs unload CO2 and load O2.
Yes, sir. The super thin squamous epithelium of the alveolus facilitates this gas exchange. Now I'll show you why admission to medical school requires knowledge of physics. Press pause. Resume when you are ready. The correct answer is B. Z will decrease. Laplace's law states that the pressure required to keep an alveolus distended is directly proportional to the surface tension and indirectly proportional to the radius. The pressure in the smaller sphere is greater. Therefore, upon opening of the valve, air will flow from the smaller sphere into the bigger sphere, resulting in a decrease in Z and an increase in Y. As alveoli decrease in size, surfactant becomes more concentrated. This decreases alveolar surface tension and prevents collapse by maintaining the 2T over R ratio. Back-to-back physics questions. Press pause. Resume when you are ready. The correct answer is C, 0.49. Think of your organs as resistors. Your cardiovascular system is designed as a parallel circuit. The reciprocal of the total peripheral resistance is equal to the sum of the reciprocals of the individual resistances. Each resistance that is added to the system decreases the total resistance. This parallel arrangement decreases the work of your left ventricle. Note the derivation of the other answer choices. Now that we have oxygen, Gatsby will let us into the mitochondria. Pyruvate decarboxylation is the link between glycolysis and the citric acid cycle.
Okay, Gatsby, we've got the oxygen. Give me oxygen!
Tranquilo, Gatsby. Not until we reach the fourth and final complex of the ETC. Let's go, Jackson. The 3-carbon pyruvate will now be decarboxylated to a 2-carbon acetyl-CoA. This carbon is released as carbon dioxide. We also capture a hydrogen in the reduction of NAD+ to NADH. The TCA cycle consists of 8 reactions, which will fully oxidize the 2 carbons of acetyl-CoA to 2 molecules of carbon dioxide. This will generate energy temporarily stored in the form of NADH, GTP, and FADH2, known as reduced electron carriers. The cycle begins with the condensation of a 2-carbon acetyl-CoA with a 4-carbon oxaloacetate, yielding a 6-carbon citrate for which the cycle is named. We begin with 6 carbons and end with 4. These 2 carbons will be lost as carbon dioxide. Citrate's twin, or isomer, is isocitrate. The 6-carbon isocitrate is oxidized to the 5-carbon alpha-ketoglutarate. In losing our first carbon, we have reduced NAD+ to NADH and produced 1 molecule of CO2. Then, the 5-carbon alpha-ketoglutarate is oxidized to the 4-carbon succinyl-CoA. Again, we have lost a carbon in the form of CO2 while also reducing NAD+ to NADH. We have already lost 2 carbons, and thus the rest of the TCA substrates only have 4 carbons. Succinyl-CoA to succinate. Double S. Very powerful. Here, substrate, another S, substrate-level phosphorylation yields GTP. This is the only source of GTP in glucose metabolism, and therefore MCAT examiners love to go after it. Remember, succinate comes after succinyl-CoA. Succinate is succinylate, LOL. Succinate is oxidized to fumarate, producing FADH2. Notice that the production of F-fumarate yields F-FADH2. Fumarate to malate, nothing of note here. And the home stretch. Malate is oxidized to oxaloacetate, yielding the third and final NADH of the cycle. My kit in keto helps me remember the order of the TCA substrates, starting with oxaloacetate. Oh, come inside, keto. Sip some fresh milk. Remember, we have 2 acetyl-CoA, so go around one more time, Jackson.
Oh, come inside, keto. Sip some fresh milk.
Pyruvate decarboxylation produces 2 NADH, and Krebs produces 2 GTP, 6 NADH, and 2 FADH2. However, these are merely reduced electron carriers. We won't produce significant ATP until we reach the electron transport chain, when we come back.